Sarah Bennett stood at the private terminal of Kennedy International Airport on a bright Tuesday morning, checking her watch for the third time in 5 minutes. She adjusted her navy blue blazer and gripped her leather briefcase tighter, feeling the weight of her presentation materials inside. In just 6 hours, she was supposed to be in Switzerland, preparing to share her breakthrough quantum computing research with some of the world's top minds. The private terminal was quiet except for the gentle hum of air conditioning and the clicking of expensive shoes on polished floors. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Sarah could see her company's private jet waiting on the tarmac, its white paint gleaming in the morning sun. The sight of it usually filled her with pride, a symbol of how far she'd come from her modest Chicago beginnings. But today, something felt off. "Excuse me, ma'am," the security guard's voice cut through her thoughts. He was a tall man with graying hair and a stern expression. "I'll need to see your identification again." Sarah kept her face neutral, even as her heart began to race. She'd already shown her ID twice. "Of course," she said calmly, reaching into her purse. She pulled out her driver's license and company ID card, sliding them across the counter. The guard picked them up, studying them with exaggerated care. Behind Sarah, the terminal door opened, and a white businessman in an expensive suit walked in. The guard barely glanced at his credentials before waving him through with a friendly nod. "Is there a problem?" Sarah asked, watching her ID cards being turned over and over in the guard's hands. "Well, ma'am, you understand we have to be very careful with private aviation security," he said, his tone condescending. "We can't just let anyone walk through claiming they own a private jet." Sarah took a deep breath, feeling the familiar weight of these moments settle on her shoulders. She faced them in college, during her PhD program, and even after founding her company. The assumptions, the extra scrutiny, the unspoken question, "Do you really belong here?" "I've shown you my identification, which matches the flight manifest," she said firmly. "I'm Dr. Sarah Bennett, CEO of Quantum Tech Solutions. That's my company's jet out there, and I have a conference to attend." The guard's face hardened. "Maybe you should wait while I verify this with my supervisor. You might be in the wrong place." Sarah noticed other travelers watching now. Some looked uncomfortable, others curious, a few understanding all too well what was happening. She pulled out her phone and opened her calendar app. "I'm happy to wait for your supervisor," she said, her voice steady. "But please understand that delaying my flight will affect my keynote speech at the World Economic Forum. I'm sure your supervisor would want to know about that." The guard's radio crackled to life. "Jim, is everything okay up there?" a voice asked. "Got a situation here," he responded, eyes still fixed on Sarah. "Someone claiming to be Dr. Bennett. Says she owns the Quantum Tech jet." Sarah heard quick footsteps approaching from behind. A younger man in an airport management uniform appeared, slightly out of breath. His eyes widened as he saw Sarah. "Dr. Bennett, I'm Mark Torres, the terminal manager," he said, extending his hand. "I am so sorry for any delay. I just saw your name pop up on our arrival list and was coming to greet you personally. Your recent Forbes cover was inspiring." The guard's face went pale. He looked down at the ID cards in his hands, then at the magazine rack near the wall, where Sarah's face graced the cover of Forbes magazine under the headline, "Revolutionizing Quantum Computing. The Visionary Behind Quantum Tech." "I'm sorry, Dr. Bennett," the guard stammered, quickly sliding her IDs back. "I was just following protocol." Sarah collected her cards, maintaining her composure. "I understand the importance of security," she said, "but perhaps we should discuss updating your protocols to ensure they're applied equally to all travelers." The manager nodded vigorously. "Absolutely, Dr. Bennett. Please, let me escort you to your aircraft. Will that someone bring your luggage right away?" As Sarah walked across the tarmac minutes later, the morning sun warm on her face, she thought about how many others had faced similar situations without the protection of success or recognition. The incident wasn't over, not for her. Tomorrow she'd make some calls. This wouldn't just be another story about discrimination. It would become a catalyst for change. Sarah Bennett sat in her private jet as it climbed through the clouds, her mind drifting back to where her journey had begun. 3 years earlier, she had been sitting in a very different place, a small office in her parents' basement in Chicago, surrounded by computer parts and empty coffee cups. Her mother, a high school math teacher, had always told her, baby, your mind is going to take you places your feet haven't even dreamed of walking." Those words echoed in Sarah's head during her hardest days at MIT, when she was often the only black woman in her advanced computing classes. The flight attendant offered her a cup of tea, bringing Sarah back to the present. She accepted it with a smile, remembering how she used to count every penny while buying instant coffee during her college days. Her parents had remortgaged their modest home to help pay for her education, believing in her dream even when others didn't. "Dr. Bennett," the attendant said, "would you like to review the conference schedule?" She handed Sarah a folder with the World Economic Forum logo. Looking at the schedule reminded Sarah of her first major presentation, back when quantum tech was just an idea. She had stood before a room of skeptical investors, her hands shaking but her voice steady. Most of them had never seen a young black woman pitch a quantum computing company before. "Your idea is interesting," one investor had said, "but perhaps you need more experience." What he really meant was that she didn't fit his image of a tech CEO. Sarah had walked out of that meeting and straight into another, and another, until she found someone who saw her vision rather than her appearance. Quantum tech's breakthrough came when Sarah solved a problem that had stumped researchers for years. She found a way to make quantum computers work at room temperature, making them practical for everyday use. The discovery happened at 3 a.m., after months of failed attempts. Sarah had called her parents immediately, crying with joy as she explained what this meant. The company grew faster than anyone expected. Within 18 months, they had offices in 3 countries and contracts with major hospitals worldwide. Sarah's quantum computers were helping doctors analyze complex medical data in minutes instead of months, saving countless lives. But success didn't erase the challenges. If anything, it made some of them more visible. Like this morning at the airport, Sarah still faced people who couldn't see past their own prejudices. The difference was that now she had the power to do something about it. She pulled out her laptop and began typing an email to her board of directors. The subject line read, "Proposal, Aviation Industry Diversity Initiative." Sarah had learned that the best response to discrimination wasn't just anger. It was action that created lasting change. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Saw the Forbes magazine at the grocery store. Bought all 5 copies they had." Sarah smiled, remembering how her mother had kept every single report card, science fair ribbon, and newspaper clipping about her achievements. The pilot's voice came over the speaker, announcing they were cruising at 40,000 feet. Sarah looked out the window at the endless blue sky. She thought about all the young girls who looked like her, dreaming big dreams in small rooms. They needed to know that the sky wasn't just something to look up at, it was something they could fly through. She opened her presentation for the World Economic Forum one more time. The title slide read, "Quantum Computing, Democratizing the Future." Below it, she added a new subtitle, "Breaking Barriers in Technology and Society." Tomorrow, she would stand on that stage in Switzerland and talk about more than just quantum computers. She would talk about quantum leaps, not just in technology, but in how we treat each other. The incident at the airport had reminded her that having a seat at the table wasn't enough. You had to use that seat to make room for others. Sarah closed her laptop and leaned back in her seat. In a few hours, she would land in Switzerland, where another set of challenges and opportunities awaited. But for now, she allowed herself a moment to appreciate how far she'd come from that basement office in Chicago. Her mother was right. Her mind had taken her places she never dreamed of walking. And she was just getting started. Sarah's private jet touched down at Zurich International Airport just as the sun was setting over the Swiss Alps. The golden light reflected off the snow-capped mountains, creating a view that would have taken her breath away if she wasn't so focused on the upcoming challenge. In less than 12 hours, she would be giving the most important presentation of her career. The Swiss airport experience was dramatically different from New York. The staff treated her with immediate respect, having been briefed about the arriving CEOs for the World Economic Forum. A young woman in a crisp uniform greeted her with a warm welcome to Switzerland, Dr. Bennett, and efficiently guided her through customs. In the luxury car taking her to her hotel, Sarah checked her phone. The story about the incident at Kennedy Airport had already spread online. Her assistant had sent her links to several tech blogs discussing it. The headlines ranged from supportive to skeptical. Tech CEO faces discrimination at private terminal, and quantum tech leader claims racial profiling. "Ms. Bennett," the driver said, interrupting her thoughts, We'll be at the Grand Hotel in 10 minutes. Would you like to take the scenic route through the Old Town? The direct route, please, Sarah replied, still scrolling through her phone. Her inbox was flooding with messages from other black executives sharing similar stories. One message caught her eye. It was from Michelle Robinson, the first black woman to serve on the International Aviation Board. Dr. Bennett, the message read, "What happened to you is unfortunately common, but you're in a position to change things. I'd like to help. Let's meet tomorrow before your speech." Sarah looked up from her phone as the car pulled into the circular driveway of the Grand Hotel. Camera flashes greeted her. News of the airport incident had made her arrival more newsworthy than expected. She straightened her blazer and stepped out of the car, offering a confident smile to the photographers. In her suite, Sarah found a welcome basket from the conference organizers and a schedule for tomorrow. Her keynote speech was set for 10 a.m. in the main hall. As she unpacked her laptop, her phone rang. It was James Chen, her company's chief operating officer. "Sarah, I've been watching the news," James said. "The airport incident is getting attention. Some people are suggesting you're using it for publicity before the conference." Sarah sat down on the edge of the hotel bed. "Of course they are," she said quietly. "When we face discrimination, we're supposed to stay quiet. If we speak up, we're causing trouble or seeking attention." "What do you want to do?" James asked. "We could release a statement focusing on the tech announcements for tomorrow." Sarah walked to the window, looking out at the twinkling lights of Zurich. "No," she said firmly. "I'm not going to pretend it didn't happen. In fact, I'm rewriting parts of my speech right now." After ending the call, Sarah opened her laptop. Her original speech had been about quantum computing's potential to revolutionize medical research. It was safe, technical, and exactly what everyone expected. But now she saw an opportunity to say something more. For the next 3 hours, Sarah worked on her presentation, weaving together the technical brilliance of quantum computing with the human story of breaking barriers. She added slides about diversity in tech, about the doors that had been closed in her face, and about the doors she planned to open for others. At midnight, her phone buzzed with another message. This one was from her mother, with a photo attached. It showed a young Sarah at her first science fair, standing proudly next to a project about computer circuits. The caption read, "You've always known how to turn obstacles into opportunities. Show them who you are, baby girl." Sarah smiled at the photo, then turned back to her laptop. Tomorrow's speech wouldn't just be about quantum computing anymore. It would be about quantum leaps in society, about how technology could only reach its full potential when we removed the human barriers that held people back. Outside her window, the lights of Zurich continued to twinkle, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell struck midnight. In just a few hours, Sarah Bennett would step onto that stage, carrying not just her company's future, but the hopes of countless others who had faced similar barriers. She was ready. The main hall of the World Economic Forum was packed with the world's most powerful people. CEOs, political leaders, and journalists filled every seat, their attention focused on the stage where Sarah Bennett stood. The large screens behind her showed her company's logo, glowing softly against a dark background. Sarah took a deep breath and looked at her watch. 10 o'clock a.m. exactly. The room fell silent as she stepped to the microphone. She wore a bright red blazer, choosing to stand out rather than blend in. Her mother had always told her, if they're going to stare anyway, give them something worth looking at. "Yesterday morning," Sarah began, her voice clear and strong, "I was stopped from boarding my own private jet because someone decided I didn't look like I belonged there." A murmur ran through the crowd. This wasn't the technical presentation they had expected. "But this speech isn't about that incident," she continued. "It's about something bigger. It's about who gets to imagine the future and who gets to build it." She clicked to her first slide, showing the quantum computer her company had built. "This machine can solve problems in minutes that would take traditional computers thousands of years. But the biggest problems we face aren't just technical. They're human." The audience leaned forward, drawn in by her words. Sarah shared the story of her first quantum breakthrough, working late in her parents' basement. She talked about the investors who wouldn't look past her gender and race, about the doors that closed before she could even knock. But then she shifted to the doors that opened, the people who saw her potential and helped her succeed. "Quantum computing teaches us something valuable," she said, moving to her next slide. "In the quantum world, Particles can exist in multiple states at once. They don't have to be just one thing. They can be many possibilities at the same time. She paused, letting that sink in. But humans? We like to put each other in boxes. We decide who someone is based on how they look, where they come from, what they sound like. We limit their possibilities before they can even show us who they are. The room was completely silent now. Sarah could see people recording her speech on their phones. In the front row, Michelle Robinson from the International Aviation Board nodded encouragingly. Yesterday's incident wasn't unique, Sarah continued. But my response to it will be, today, I'm announcing the launch of the Quantum Tech Diversity Initiative. We're investing $50 million to create opportunities in tech and aviation for underrepresented groups. Applause broke out, but Sarah raised her hand. She wasn't finished. And there's more. We're partnering with 10 major airlines and private aviation companies to change their training and hiring practices. Because diversity isn't just about letting people in, it's about making them feel they belong. She clicked to her final slides, showing the technical details of Quantum Tech's latest innovations. These computers will change medicine, climate science, and space exploration, but technology alone can't fix human prejudice. That takes all of us, choosing to see possibilities instead of limitations. Sarah ended her speech by showing a photo of herself as a young girl, standing in front of her first computer. That little girl didn't know she'd face so many closed doors. But she also didn't know she'd learned to build her own doors and hold them open for others. The audience rose in a standing ovation. Sarah could see tears in some people's eyes. Phones lit up across the hall as people shared her words on social media. Her speech was already trending online. As she stepped away from the podium, a group of young tech students, mostly women and people of color, waved to her from the back of the hall. She smiled and waved back, remembering her mother's words about giving people something worth looking at. In her seat, Michelle Robinson was already typing on her phone, drafting a joint statement about their new aviation industry initiative. The incident that was meant to humiliate Sarah had instead become a platform for real change. Sarah's phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a message from her mother. "You didn't just open doors today, baby. You tore down walls." Sarah smiled, knowing this was just the beginning. The hours after Sarah's speech were a whirlwind of activity. Her phone wouldn't stop buzzing with messages and calls, and reporters crowded around her as she left the main hall. Camera flashes followed her everywhere, but this time, they weren't just interested in the airport incident. They wanted to know more about her vision for change. "Dr. Bennett," called out a reporter from Tech Weekly, "your speech has gone viral. The video has over 1 million views already. Did you expect this response?" Sarah smiled, remembering how her mother always said that truth spoken clearly would always find its audience. "I spoke from my heart about real problems that need real solutions," she answered. "People respond to honesty." In a quiet corner of the conference center, Sarah met with Michelle Robinson from the International Aviation Board. They sat at a small table, surrounded by their teams, working out the details of their new initiative. Papers covered the table as they planned how to transform the aviation industry's approach to diversity. "We need to start with security training," Michelle said, pointing to her notes. "What happened to you happens to people every day, but most of them have the platform to speak up about it." Sarah nodded, thinking about all the messages she'd received from people sharing similar stories. "Training is important," she agreed. "But we also need to change who's making the decisions. We need diverse voices at every level." Her phone buzzed again. This time it was James Chen, her COO, with surprising news. "Sarah, you won't believe this. The security company from Kennedy Airport just called. They want to be the first to implement our new training program. They're worried about losing their contract after what happened." Sarah leaned back in her chair, thinking. "Tell them yes," she said after a moment. "But with one condition. They need to hire more women and people of color in leadership positions. We're not just training people to be less biased. We're changing who has the power to make decisions." By late afternoon, Sarah had received calls from 3 major tech companies wanting to join her initiative. Even more surprising was the call from Marcus Thompson, one of the investors who had turned her down 3 years ago when she was first starting Quantum Tech. "I was wrong about you, Dr. Bennett," Marcus said over the phone. "And I suspect I've been wrong about a lot of other talented people who didn't fit my idea of what a tech CEO should look like. I want to set up a meeting to discuss funding your diversity initiative. Sarah scheduled the meeting but reminded herself to be cautious. Real change needed more than just guilty consciences and quick reactions to bad publicity. It needed sustained commitment and real resources. That evening, in her hotel room, Sarah held a video call with her parents. Her mother's eyes were shining with pride. "Baby, you took something ugly and turned it into something beautiful," she said. "That's always been your special gift." "But the real work starts now," Sarah replied, looking at the stack of proposals on her desk. She had meetings scheduled for the next 2 weeks with aviation companies, tech firms, and diversity experts. The incident that tried to keep her off a plane was about to change the entire industry. Her father, who had been quiet during the call, finally spoke up. "Remember when you were little and got picked last for everything at school? You didn't just practice harder. You started your own science club and made sure everyone got picked." Sarah laughed, remembering those days. "Some things never change, Dad. We're still making sure everyone gets picked." After ending the call, Sarah walked to the window of her hotel room. The lights of Zurich sparkled below, and in the distance, she could see planes taking off and landing at the airport. Each of those planes represented hundreds of people's stories, their dreams, their struggles, their journeys. She pulled out her laptop and began working on the detailed plan for her initiative. The world had heard her speech. The words alone weren't enough. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. Sarah Bennett was ready to turn her moment of discrimination into a movement for lasting change. 1 month after her powerful speech at the World Economic Forum, Sarah sat in her New York office, looking at the wall of screens showing news coverage from around the world. Her message had sparked something bigger than she had imagined. The story wasn't just about one incident anymore. It had become a movement. "Dr. Bennett," her assistant called from the doorway, "the first group of scholarship students is here for the orientation." Sarah smiled and stood up, straightening her jacket. In the large conference room, 20 young faces looked up at her with excitement. These were the first recipients of the Quantum Tech Future Leaders Scholarship, chosen from thousands of applicants from underserved communities. "Welcome to Quantum Tech," Sarah began, looking at each student. "1 month ago, someone tried to stop me from boarding my own plane. Today, we're making sure that doors don't stay closed for the next generation." The students, ranging from high school seniors to college graduates, represented the diversity Sarah wanted to see in the tech world. Among them was Maria Rodriguez, a young woman from the Bronx who had taught herself coding while working 2 jobs to help her family. "Your stories remind me of my own," Sarah told them, walking around the room. "But you won't have to work in a basement like I did. You'll have real labs, real mentors, and real opportunities." Just then, James Chen poked his head into the room. "Sarah, sorry to interrupt, but you need to see this. The Aviation Security Board just voted on our proposal." Sarah excused herself and followed James to his office. On his computer screen, she read the breaking news. "Aviation Security Board approves mandatory diversity training and hiring requirements." The vote had been unanimous. "This is huge," James said, scrolling through the details. "Every airport in the country will have to implement the training program we developed. And look at this, they're requiring 40% diverse representation in security management positions within 3 years." Sarah thought about the security guard who had tried to stop her that day. She had learned he was now one of the strongest supporters of the new training program, speaking to other security teams about his experience and what he had learned. Her phone buzzed with a text from Michelle Robinson. "We did it. This is just the beginning. Ready to take this international?" Back in the conference room, Sarah shared the news with the scholarship students. "This is why your presence here matters," she explained. "Change doesn't just happen in boardrooms or through policies. It happens when people like you claim your space in these industries." Later that afternoon, Sarah visited a local high school in Harlem where Quantum Tech was setting up a new computer lab. The excitement on the students' faces as they explored the new equipment reminded her of her own childhood wonder with technology. "Dr. Bennett," a young girl asked, raising her hand, "I read about what happened to you at the airport. Weren't you scared?" Sarah knelt beside the girl's desk. "Being scared is normal," she said. "But being brave means doing what's right even when you're scared. And sometimes, what seems like an obstacle can become an opportunity to help others." That evening, Sarah had a video call with her board of directors. The numbers were impressive. 50 companies had joined their initiative, hundreds of scholarships have been funded, and thousands of hours of training have been completed. But here's the most important number, Sarah said, showing her final slide: 0. That's how many similar incidents have been reported at airports that implemented our training program in the past month. After the call, Sarah worked late in her office, reviewing applications for the next round of scholarships. On her desk sat the Forbes magazine with her cover story, next to a new article titled "How One Incident Sparked a Tech Revolution." Her mother's words from years ago echoed in her mind. Your mind will take you places your feet haven't even dreamed of walking. Sarah looked out her office window at the New York skyline, thinking about how far she'd come, and more importantly, how many others would follow. The incident that tried to ground her had instead given her wings, not just to fly herself, but to help others soar as well. 6 months after her famous speech, Sarah Bennett faced her biggest test yet. She stood in front of the United Nations General Assembly, preparing to address representatives from 193 countries. The topic: making technology and aviation accessible to everyone, regardless of their background. Behind her, the large screen showed pictures from Quantum Tech's programs around the world. There were images of young girls coding in rural India, students building computers in South Africa, and women training to become aviation security managers in Brazil. But not everyone was happy with these changes. Dr. Bennett, a reporter had asked earlier that morning, some companies are claiming your diversity requirements are too expensive. They say it's affecting their profits. How do you respond? Sarah had expected this pushback. Change never came easy, especially when it affected powerful people's money, but she had come prepared with facts and figures. In the Grand UN Hall, Sarah began her speech differently this time. 6 months ago, I told you about being stopped from boarding my own plane. Today, I want to tell you about Maria Rodriguez, one of our scholarship students. She clicked to a new slide showing Maria, the young woman from the Bronx, standing next to a quantum computer she had helped build. Maria discovered a way to make our computers work 30% faster. She did this in her first 3 months as an intern. Imagine all the talent we've been missing because we didn't open the right doors. The audience murmured with interest. Sarah continued, companies worried about costs should worry more about the cost of lost talent. In just 6 months, our diverse teams have filed more patents than we did in the previous 2 years. Just then, Sarah noticed some commotion at the back of the hall. Security guards were talking into their radios, and people were checking their phones. James Chen rushed to the stage and whispered in her ear. A group of companies has just announced they're starting their own alternative initiative with fewer requirements, he said. They're trying to undermine our program. Sarah nodded calmly and turned back to the microphone. She had learned that obstacles were often opportunities in disguise. I've just been informed that some companies think our standards are too high, she said. They want an easier path. But let me ask you this, when did making things easier ever make them better? She clicked to her next slide, showing financial results. Companies that fully adopted our program saw their innovation rates increase by 45%. Their employee satisfaction went up by 60%. And yes, their profits grew too. In the audience, Sarah could see Michelle Robinson smiling. They had prepared for this moment. Today, I'm proud to announce that the International Aviation Authority has agreed to make our standards the global requirement for all airports and airlines. The hall burst into applause. Sarah continued, and for companies worried about costs, Quantum Tech is creating a support fund. We'll help smaller businesses implement these changes, because diversity isn't a luxury, it's a necessity for success in the modern world. After her speech, Sarah met with a group of business leaders who had opposed her program. Instead of arguing, she listened to their concerns and then showed them something surprising: their own employees' feedback about wanting more diverse and inclusive workplaces. Your future leaders are already telling you what they want, she told them. The question is, will you be ahead of this change, or will you be forced to catch up? That evening, Sarah received an unexpected call. It was the CEO of one of the companies that had announced the alternative initiative. Dr. Bennett, he said, we'd like to withdraw from our announcement and join your program instead. Our employees made it clear which side of history they want to be on. In her hotel room later, Sarah looked out at the New York skyline. Her phone showed messages from Maria Rodriguez and other students celebrating their latest breakthrough in quantum computing. On her laptop, dozens of new companies were applying to join her initiative. The door that had once been closed to her was now open wide, and through it walked a steady stream of dreamers, innovators, and change-makers. Sarah smiled, knowing that sometimes the biggest victories come after the hardest fights. 1 year after the incident at Kennedy Airport, Sarah Bennett stood in a very different terminal. This time, she wasn't alone. Behind her stood 100 young people from all over the world, each wearing a badge that read, Quantum Tech Future Leaders. The terminal itself had changed. The security staff was diverse. The managers represented different backgrounds, and on the wall hung a large sign reading Aviation for All. The guard who had once tried to stop Sarah was now the head of diversity training, traveling around the world to share his story of learning and change. Welcome to our first Global Tech and Aviation Summit, Sarah announced to the crowd. 1 year ago, someone thought I didn't belong here. Today, we're making sure everyone belongs. The young leaders cheered. Among them was Maria Rodriguez, now a senior engineer at Quantum Tech. Her quantum computing breakthrough had made headlines in scientific journals, and she was preparing to launch her own research division. Dr. Bennett, a young man, raised his hand. My parents used to clean airplanes. Now I'm designing them. Thank you for showing us that our dreams have no limits. Sarah smiled, remembering her own journey. The numbers told an impressive story. Over 5,000 scholarships awarded, 300 companies participating in their initiative, and diversity rates in tech and aviation had doubled in just 1 year. But the real story wasn't in the numbers. It was in the faces she saw every day, the young girl who discovered she loved coding, the security officer who learned to see beyond stereotypes, the executive who realized diversity made his company stronger. As she walked through the terminal with her group, Sarah noticed something that made her stop. A small black girl, about 7 years old, was watching planes through the window with her mother. Excuse me, Sarah said, walking over to them. Would you like to see inside the cockpit of that plane? She pointed to her private jet on the tarmac. The girl's eyes widened. Can I really? Of course, Sarah replied. And maybe one day, you'll fly one of these yourself. Later that day, Sarah had a special ceremony to attend. The Kennedy Airport terminal where she had faced discrimination was being renamed. The new name? The Bennett Terminal for Innovation and Inclusion. During the ceremony, Sarah shared the stage with her parents, her team, and many of the young people whose lives had changed through her initiative. Michelle Robinson from the Aviation Board presented her with an award, but Sarah had something else to announce. Today, Quantum Tech is launching the biggest technology education program in history, she declared. We're building free tech learning centers in underserved communities worldwide, because talent is everywhere, but opportunity isn't. At least not yet. The audience erupted in applause, but Sarah wasn't finished. And one more thing, she continued. Remember that little girl who watched planes through her window and dreamed of flying? Well, starting today, every airport in our network will have a special viewing area for children, with information about careers in aviation and tech. We're calling it the Dreamer's Window. That evening, Sarah sat in her office, looking at 2 photographs on her wall. The first showed her standing alone outside that terminal a year ago, facing discrimination. The second showed her surrounded by hundreds of young faces from around the world, all reaching for their dreams. Her phone buzzed with a message from Maria. Just interviewed our new quantum computing team. Most diverse group yet. Their ideas are amazing. Sarah smiled and walked to her window. The sun was setting over New York, painting the sky in beautiful colors. Below, she could see the lights of countless offices where people were working, dreaming, and creating the future. Her mother's words still echoed in her mind. Your mind will take you places your feet haven't even dreamed of walking. But now Sarah had a new saying of her own. Success isn't about how high you fly, it's about how many people you lift up with you. One incident had tried to keep her grounded. Instead, it helped her build wings for countless others to soar.